Episode 2, Motive, Means, and Opportunity. Kit's legal name was Christian Richard Martin. Prior to about 2005, friends and family referred to him as Chris. He adopted the nickname Kit during one of his stints in the Army National Guard. Kit grew up in a military family. His father was a 30-year veteran of the Air Force, which meant frequent moves. He spent most of his early years growing up in Germany. In this picture, Kit is seen with his sisters Victoria, Juliet, and Amanda. Kit married his first wife, Stacy, at the age of 20. They had 3 children, Mackenzie, Chase, and Zachary. Mackenzie is shown here with Chris and Stacy. Sadly, the marriage ended after 13 years, which brings us to Joan Harmon Guerra. Kit met Joan through a Yahoo Personals ad. She went by the tag Surfer Girl. They were married on December 7, 2004. Shortly after that, Kit re-enlisted, and Kit, Joan, and her 3 kids, Alma, Essie, and Elijah, also known as EJ and Justin, moved to Germany for 5 years. Kit's marriage to Joan was full of deception. Joan lied about the fathers of her children, accusing one of child abuse. She lied about her background, but more importantly, she lied about the divorce from her first husband. She was still married to him when she married Kit. Kit had 3 deployments while based in Germany, so there wasn't a lot of time to get acquainted with his new wife and family. He would not learn of Joan's many lies until much later. He certainly had no idea that his supposed marriage to Joan would be the catalyst for a triple homicide investigation. On their return to the States in 2010, they lived briefly in Rhode Island, and from there they moved to Pembroke, Kentucky, a rural town located in the southwestern corner of the state. Pembroke was a short drive from Fort Campbell, where Kit served as an Apache helicopter pilot with the 101st Airborne Division. By this time, Kit had achieved the rank of Major. Kit and Joan bought a house in Pembroke at auction with plans to remodel it. One of their first remodeling efforts was to paint the house a bright yellow. It wasn't long after the move to Pembroke that the relationship between Kit and Joan began to deteriorate. In this courtroom video, Kit's daughter Mackenzie describes the constant badgering that Kit endured from Joan.
Do you recall any times that you spent with the 2 of them that, prior to September 5th, that you felt that she was afraid of your dad in any way?
No, ma'am, not at all. It's quite the opposite, actually.
What do you mean it's quite the opposite?
Well, especially not so much before, but ever since I moved into the residence 2 months ago, any chance that she had, anytime my dad wasn't in the room, even sometimes when he was in the room, she was constantly saying slanderous things about him and about my mother, almost on a daily basis.
On September 5th, 2012, Kit had finally had enough. He told Joan that he wanted a divorce. That's when Joan issued an ominous threat. Here is Mackenzie once again describing what she heard Joan tell her dad the night he asked her for a divorce.
From your personal observations, what was the relationship between your dad and Joan like during that year?
I noticed that after I moved in, it had become a lot more problematic. There was a lot of arguing at that time.
Were you there the night that your father and Joan separated?
I was.
Can you tell the jury about that night?
Essentially, there was an argument, and at the conclusion of the argument, I overheard my dad say, to her that he just couldn't handle.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Sustained.
Judge, it's not for the truth of the matter. She's talking about what was said during an argument.
To the limited extent that that is her testimony, no explanation, I'll allow that.
So the judge said that you can tell the jury what you heard your dad say.
He stated that he wanted a divorce from her at that time.
Right. And what did you hear Joan say in response?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Same grounds, Judge.
Just overruled. Go ahead. You may answer that question specifically.
She said, if you leave me, she said, if you leave me, I will ruin your life. I'll ruin your military career. I know how to do it. I'll tell them that you abused me.
Over the next 2.5 years, Joan made a slew of accusations against Kit, including spousal abuse, child abuse, and sexual assault. Kit faced both civil and military investigations. While he was cleared by civil authorities, JAG prosecutors brought charges against Kit that resulted in a court-martial trial being scheduled for early December of 2015. The prosecution's star witness was Kit's neighbor, Calvin Phillips. Calvin Phillips was also a military veteran. His wife, Pam, worked as a compliance officer for a bank. So how did Calvin Phillips become the star witness against Kit in his upcoming court-martial trial? The Phillipses lived across the street, catty-corner to Kit's house. JAG prosecutors wanted Calvin to testify because as the investigation dragged on, they realized that Joan was an unreliable witness. In their eyes, Calvin had more credibility. Calvin is also the individual who brought to their attention images of Joan's son Elijah that was purported to show alleged child abuse at the hands of his stepdad, Kit Martin. It's important to note that Kit denies causing the injuries to EJ. Calvin also provided CDs in a laptop belonging to Kit that he and Joan had discovered in a storage container. It was later determined that the laptop and CDs contained classified information. After several delays and schedule changes, Kit's court-martial was finally scheduled for December 1, 2015. Joan's threat to ruin his life and military career was finally coming to fruition. But did Kit really have a motive to kill Calvin Phillips? When police first discovered the subpoena for Calvin to testify at Kit's court-martial, there was also a second subpoena from Kit's lawyers for Calvin to testify for the defense. Turns out that Kit had several audio recordings, recorded secretly by 2 private investigators working on Kit's behalf, where Calvin made statements favorable to Kit's defense. In this first excerpt, recorded in the summer of 2015 in Calvin's front yard, Kit's private investigator, Mary Martins, talks about Joan's pattern of making false abuse allegations.
What my investigation is showing so far, independent of anything he's doing with the military, I don't work with military authorities, I don't work with police departments or anything else, I just work independent to try to dig up the facts. The vast majority of the facts I have dug up is she goes through men and gets what she wants out of them. She tells whatever lies she can tell. She did it with her first husband, her second husband, with him.
So you're talking exploiter.
And,
oh, yeah.
And I don't know if she's like one of these Black Widow type, not that she kills or anything, but she does have a pattern of exploiting men, getting what she needs out of them, and she lines up the next man before she actually leaves whoever she's with. But with each one, it's a similar story. She meets her new man, she starts lining up, my husband's abusing me, he's hurting the kids, he's hurting me, he's done this, he's done that. And then she uses that next man to help her
bridge over.
That's right.
Okay.
Kit was facing serious abuse allegations, including molesting Joan's 2 young daughters. So Mary Martins questioned Calvin whether he had any first-hand knowledge of abuse. Calvin relayed a story he heard from Joan's son, EJ.
He had a hard time communicating with me, so I just spent time with a young man. That's what I did when I was in the military.
Did he ever talk to you about being abused?
Yeah, well, in fact, that was the thing that, you know, we talked about Fairmont, when he went to Fairmont, how that was, you know, the Boy Scout thing. He had mentioned that he was not treated right.
Did he say who didn't treat him right?
Basically, Kit.
What did he give you any
examples? Well, the one thing that I can tell you that he had worked a while to rebuild his mom's bicycle. Okay. Elijah had. And so I was showing him how to use chrome polish on the wheels, and we were evidently he was supposed to have done some chores or whatever, and he didn't do them within the regimen of time. So, you know, he got on to him for it, which I can understand. But the next day the kid's foot was, and I said, what happened? And he said, well, he stomped me and he threw me on the ground. Okay, well, I didn't see it. Okay, this kid, he could have made it up. I don't know, I wasn't there.
Calvin's statement that he wasn't there is important because it showed that Calvin didn't have any first-hand knowledge of abuse. Additionally, Kit's defense team had a witness that was on that very same scout trip who said that the interaction between Kit and EJ was normal. In this last excerpt, Mary Martins gives Calvin another opportunity to come forward with any information he has about possible abuse.
While they were living there, besides the one day that you saw Elijah's foot like that, did Joan ever talk to you before she went to sanctuary and before all this? Did you ever see any abuse? Did she talk?
If Kit was convicted of child abuse, it would likely end his military career. But there would be no financial payout to Joan for that abuse. That's because Joan was not legally married to him. In fact, Joan had been convicted of bigamy. She was not entitled to spousal support, child support, or any of Kit's benefits. On the other hand, if Kit was convicted of sexual assault, there was a potential payout as high as $250,000. So when Calvin said that Joan never talked to him about abuse, it was evidence that Kit could use to defend himself against all of the abuse allegations, including sexual assault. What about Joan? Did she have a motive for wanting Calvin Phillips dead? There is evidence that as the date for the court-martial drew closer, Calvin was having second thoughts about backing Joan's story. In this next audio recording, recorded secretly by Kit's two private investigators, Calvin is confronted about his alleged affair with Joan.
You also have to kind of think about and consider that there may be some other questions that may be asked of you that might be uncomfortable.
Whatever.
One of the things, the information that the Army has is the fact that apparently you were having an affair with Joan.
Okay.
Okay, that's what they have.
And so what?
That short clip was recorded on November 2nd, 2015, a little more than 2 weeks before the murders. That same day, those two private investigators drove to the L&R Soda Bar in Elkton, Kentucky, where Joan was working as a waitress. Their goal was to draw Joan into a conversation about how to navigate abuse claims in the military. The idea was to talk about a non-existent family member who was being abused by their military husband. Their plan worked, and Joan was all too eager to offer her advice. Here's a short clip from that conversation.
The only reason I am where I am is because I was a major's wife for over 10 years and I knew the system because I used to be the family supporter and I knew all the programs and all the people. So tell her to call me when she gets here, okay?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay?
I appreciate it.
It's God.
Thank you. He led me here today, I guess.
Yes, he did.
That's all I can say.
And our last day of hell is December 1st. And then we're done. And I left him 3 years ago.
And it's still going on.
3 years.
That's a nightmare.
It is. And the kids don't need to be all wrapped up and all of that.
Did he give you any grief with child custody or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Because after the court-martial, he goes to prison, but...
In the previous clip, Joan talked about knowing the exact steps to take to get the military involved in an abuse claim. She also mentioned what her expected outcome was of Kit's court-martial with him going to prison. Within a day or two of both Calvin and Joan being secretly recorded, Calvin is alleged to have driven to the L&R soda bar to confront Joan. In this next clip, Lisa Petrie, who was Joan's manager at the soda shop, confirms the confrontation.
What I do know is that the person that came to see me and Kenny, whoever, Summers, told me that story, or told me that he wasn't going to testify. I didn't hear anything about a confrontation, but Pam said she did.
Kit's defense lawyer, Tom Griffiths, talked about motive in his closing argument. Here are a few clips where Tom describes what may have been a motive for Joan to commit this crime.
The reason I say that is because in their opening, and perhaps in their closing, the prosecution said the important thing is motive means an opportunity. I want to point out to you that you did not hear those words from the judge. That is not Kentucky law. That is not a test. That is not an element. That is not something. You look through those instructions, you will not find them in there. The instructions from the court reflect the actual law of Kentucky and help you in your job to reach a verdict in this case. Because the prosecution wants you to guess. They do. They want you to guess. And that is not the law in the United States. It's not the law in Kentucky. It's not the law that the judge read. If you look at those instructions, they say the prosecution has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Chris did it. That's what the instructions say. That's the law. Not speculation, not maybe some other phantom person out there in the world, but the prosecutor bears the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Chris did this, and they can't, and they haven't, because he did not do this. Let's talk about Joan for a second. I sure wish we had seen her on this witness stand. I want to suggest perhaps the prosecutor will say the same thing. She has a lot to answer for. And there are a lot of questions that would have been helpful for you to hear the answers to. So Joan, what do we know about Joan? Joan makes threats, and those are not distant threats that are unconnected over time. There is a constant presence of Joan, malicious presence of Joan in Chris's life after they split up. She is not happy. We heard she was prosecuted. She doesn't get benefits because it turns out that their marriage was invalid because she was married to another guy. This is not somebody with a whole lot of credibility. She puts Calvin Phillips up to approaching the military authorities with this evidence. And she goes, you heard, to civilian and military authorities and is trying and complaining, and one sticks. Because she's going to ruin his life. And it sticks And then I think she starts to realize that it's not going to work as well as she thought. Prosecution talked about motive, means, and opportunity. All right. Did she have a motive to do this? I'll ruin your life. She has a motive to start a court process, one of multiple. And if she thinks it's falling apart, and she thinks that Calvin is going to come in and testify in a way that undermines what she's doing, does she have a motive to kill him? I would suggest to you that her motive has more to do with framing.
But motive alone doesn't tell the whole story. The prosecution argued that Kit also had the means. Kit was a major in the Army. He served 3 tours in Iraq and received the Bronze Star. He had also been through Army Ranger training. Additionally, Kit was a gun enthusiast. He had a small arsenal of pistols, rifles, and ammunition that police confiscated from his home and vehicle. Ballistics evidence would show that 2 different guns were used to kill the 3 victims. One was a .45 caliber gun. The second was a .22 caliber. Kit owned a Glock 45. He also owned a combination of 4 rifles and pistols that were .22 caliber. But what about Joan? Did she have the means to commit these murders?
Does she have the means? Yes. We know she has guns. We know she has access, and access with the key, or access earlier to Chris's gun. And everybody has guns. If you want to have a gun in Kentucky, you have guns.
On one occasion, while you were doing that work, did you learn that Joan Harmon had a gun that she carried on her person?
Yes, she had came up here, was showing us how she wanted the ceiling done, and when she left up, it's like got 2 steps, she stepped up, and when she stepped up, her blouse came up, and she had a pistol behind her waist.
Did you get a good enough look at it to tell what kind of gun it was?
It was like a Glock.
Okay.
So, according to the prosecution, Kit had the motive and the means to commit this crime. But did he have the opportunity? At first glance, the answer seems obvious. Kit lived across the street from all 3 victims. But Kit's proximity to the victims isn't the whole story. By November 2015, Kit had met Laura Spencer. She and her 2 kids, Austin and Emma, had been living in the Yellow House for about a year and a half. Kit and Laura were also engaged. In fact, the day of the murders, November 18, 2015, Kit and Laura were celebrating an anniversary. Additionally, Kit had security camera footage that showed the exact times when everyone in the house came and went. This next sequence of clips was taken from Kit's security camera on the day of the murders. The timestamp shown is in the 24-hour format. The actual time, however, is 1 hour earlier because the internal clock on the hard drive had not been adjusted to standard time, which had occurred a few weeks earlier. This first clip shows Laura getting into her car around 5:46 a.m. and leaving a minute later. Next to leave the house is Austin and Emma. They pull out of the driveway at 7:23 a.m. Kit leaves the house at 9:11 a.m. Pam Phillips left her house a little earlier than normal this day because she had 2 training sessions to give at 2 different bank branches. We don't know the exact time, but it would have been around 6:30 a.m. At around 10:45 a.m., Pam received a call from a delivery truck driver who was supposed to deliver a washing machine. He sat in his truck in pouring rain and told Pam that no one had answered the door. That leaves an approximate 4-hour window when Calvin could have been killed. Kit was home alone for almost 2 hours during this time frame, but there was no security camera footage showing him leaving his house. In this next sequence of clips, Kit's security camera caught the movements of everyone before, during, and after the time when Pam Phillips and Ed Danzero were murdered. First to arrive back home was Laura. She arrived back at the house at 2:34 p.m. Again, the timestamp is 1 hour later than the actual time. Kit arrives home at 4:14 p.m. He gets out of his car and walks off screen to check the mail. When he comes back to the car, he grabs some items from the front passenger seat. Among the items he grabs are roses for Laura. After returning to the car one last time, he finally enters the home at 4:17 p.m. Austin and Emma arrive home from school 13 minutes later at 4:30 p.m. After changing their clothes, they both leave the residence to meet up with friends at Chick-fil-A at 5:23 p.m. By this time, it was mostly dark outside. Here is where the prosecution timeline falls apart. Pam left the bank at around 5 p.m. We know this because a co-worker snapped a picture of her as she was leaving the bank parking lot. You can already see the light was fading. Investigators know that Pam Phillips was murdered at approximately 5:30 p.m. They know this because Pam was on a phone call with family friend Marlene LaRocque, who heard a scream and then silence. It's quite possible that Austin and Emma passed Pam as she was pulling into her driveway. Laura and Kit were home alone with no kids in the house. They had just a few hours to celebrate their anniversary. So what did they do during this time? Here is Laura talking about that very topic.
It was a day later than our anniversary, and so he came home and he brought me some roses. We had a nice dinner, just a nice quiet evening in.
So kids are out of the house.
Kids are out of the house.
Day after your anniversary.
Yes.
Quiet time at home.
Yes.
It doesn't happen very often.
No.
So how did you guys spend your anniversary that night?
Just a regular evening, dinner, hanging out, just a nice quiet time together, watching some TV. May have had some other special time.
Sure.
When Austin and Emma return from their dinner at 8:25 p.m., they find Laura and Kit cuddled up on the couch watching TV. They do not see anything that would lead them to believe that Kit had just murdered 2 people.
You talked a little bit already about your day, as far as you can remember, on the 18th. So you got home and you checked in or went and sat in the den, right? The den that you're talking about is actually a converted bedroom on the second floor, right?
Right.
So when you went in there, Laura and Kit were sitting there watching TV?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that was ordinary, right?
Normal day?
They didn't act funny?
No.
Kit wasn't dressed funny?
No.
He didn't look like he'd been in a fight?
No.
He didn't look like he was covered with anything strange?
No.
What was he doing while he was sitting there with Laura, your mom?
They were curled up on the couch with each other and just watching TV.
Now everyone is home, but there's still activity going on across the street. Someone has to dump Calvin's body in the basement. Someone has to load Ed and Pam into Pam's car. There is evidence to indicate that someone used paper towels and clothes to clean up the crime scene. They then placed those items beneath Calvin's body and set them on fire. Kit has 3 alibi witnesses that testified that he never left the house. But what about his security camera footage? What does it show? Here Kit is shown at 11:43 p.m. going out to his backyard.
Did you leave your house, your property, anytime later on that night?
No, I remember the dogs. I checked on the dogs one time because they're like whining about something. And I went out and closed the side gate so they wouldn't be in that little yard. That's the only time I remember going out again.
Kit's backyard had 2 fenced areas. One area was on the left side of the house, right side as viewed in this image. The second area covered the remainder of the backyard and extended to the garage. Both fenced-in areas had a clear view of the Phillips' driveway. It is very likely that the dogs were barking at activity going on across the street. They may have even recognized the people moving cars and bodies. There was one more event in the timeline that has to be accounted for. Someone set Pam's car on fire at approximately 1:45 a.m., which brings us to the kerosene heater. It was late November when there can be large temperature swings. 2 days before the murders, the temperature never got above 54 degrees. One way to keep a house warm on cold nights was to use a kerosene heater. November 18 happened to be the very first night that they were going to use the kerosene heater that season. In order to make sure that it was operating normally, Kit had set his alarm for 1:10 a.m. so that he could go downstairs and check on it.
There has been testimony that you set an alarm for a little bit after 1 in the morning.
Yeah.
Can you explain to the jury why that was?
Yeah, so with a kerosene heater, you need to keep the wick wet. You can't let it dry out.
Why not?
I don't know. It's been a long time since I had to use one, but I remember that was bad. It was bad in that. That's why I think I screwed up my old kerosene heater. So you had to keep it. You had to keep some kerosene in the reservoir, and then like I said, I think it was the first night I was running a new heater, so I was a little concerned about it. And so I usually set my alarm November through March, and during the night to go check out at least once to refill it and check to make sure everything was going right.
The prosecution argued that Kit had set his alarm for 1:10 a.m. to remind him to go across the street where he needed to load bodies into Pam's car, clean up the crime scene, and ultimately set Pam's car on fire in John Homick's farm field. Lead prosecutor Barbara Whaley would argue that the evidence pointed directly at Kit. But did it? That's the story told in episode 3 of Framed.